ready?
Garrett was out in the hallway.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Civil Justice Sub for Tuesday, February the 1st, 2022. Ms. TJ, take the roll.
Representatives Clemens. Here. Curcio. Farmer. Present. Garrett. Griffey. Here. Ogles. Parkinson. Here. Ramsey. Here. Chairman Russell. Here. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Members, are there any personal orders or announcements this morning? Dr. Bob?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I just want to say congratulations on your appointment as chairman of the committee. We look forward to working with you this year, and best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Griffey.
Thank you, Chairman. I join in Chairman Ramsey's sentiment on that. Glad to have you leading this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess since all these Republicans done said that a Democrat should probably say something too. I'm just kidding. I'm excited about your chairmanship. I think the world of you. Glad to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here. All right. I'd like to introduce some people that will help make this committee run smooth. First, TJ Sutton, my assistant. Our research analysis, Ben Voitas. I got the list. Did you? Clerk's office, Alexis Anger. Sergeant on Arms, Johnny McDonald. Audio Visible, Elizabeth Edwards. And Legal, Michelle Fogarty. And I'd like to congratulate Chairman Farmer for being moved up to the Chairman of Civil Justice Full. And, of course, I'd like to thank Speaker Sexton for his appointing me to Civil Justice Subcommittee. It's truly an honor to serve with each and every one of you. We will start by reading the rules that we went over last year. It says the committee will start promptly at 9 a.m. on Tuesdays, except for today. The sponsor of a bill must request a roll call prior to any vote being taken on the bill. This House Rule 83. Once the chairman has made a ruling, only by a show of 3 committee members' hands may a roll call vote be requested, and such request must be made before the next bill is called. The amendment deadline is 10 a.m. on Mondays, the day before the amendment is to be heard in committee. Voice amendments will not be entertained unless a clerical in nature error making technical corrections. There will be no running debate. Members may speak only when recognized by the chairman. Debate may be limited in time at the chairman's discretion. Members bringing guests who wish to speak must give advance notice to the committee staff 24 hours before the committee is scheduled to meet. Paper will not be distributed in the committees. If anyone wants materials distributed to members, it must be provided to a committee staff electronically prior to the meeting so that it may be emailed to members and added to the dashboard program. Sponsors may calendar a bill 3 times. Once a bill has been heard 3 times, it does not pass out of committee. It will be referred to a special calendar to be heard with the final calendar. These policies are waivable by the chairman at his discretion. All right, is there any questions? All right, with that being said, we have got 4 bills on the calendar today, and we will address bill number 2 first. It has been taken off notice, and without objection, it will be placed on the special calendar. To be published with the final calendar. And then item number 1, House Bill 1876 by Representative Zachary. We have a motion and a second. Representative Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, and we do have some amendments, Mr. Chairman, that we need to address and withdraw.
Okay, I've got, let's start out with your first amendment. What number do you have?
Yes, sir, drafting code 012178.
That's it. Got a motion? Got a motion and a second. You recognize on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you had referenced being late to this committee. I'll take full responsibility and blame for that. Meeting with the speaker. After discussion with multiple parties and the work that's gone into this, there is an amendment that is closer to the final language that we're going to have. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move to withdraw 012178.
Without objection, Amendment 12178 is withdrawn. We have a second amendment. Representative Ramsey, you wish to run that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do. It was timely filed. It's,
I'll need a motion and a second. Okay,
the number is 12693, and I would make the motion to approve.
we got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. All right, you recognize.
This amendment is based on the language that's found in the bill itself, and we've had a lot of discussion with the certainly with the interest and involvement of the sponsor, and we have apparently come to a agreement that this amendment, which the amendment actually mitigates some of the language, and there are plans before we get to the full committee to actually amend this one, but the sponsor has agreed to make this a friendly amendment in the subcommittee. And what it does is it allows the facilities that are required by the bill, unamended bill, requires affected employers to grant all requests for medical and religious exemptions, and this does give them some leeway as far as time constraints in approving. And so with that explanation and pending further questions, I would ask that we put this amendment on the bill.
Questions been? Representative Clemens, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I understand I'm a little out of the loop on the procedure here, but I do have questions about the amendment if that's going to make the bill, and so I just wanted to know if I should direct them to the amendment sponsor or the bill sponsor.
Dr. Ramsey.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this amendment was not intended to make the bill, but I will refer to the sponsor since he has deemed that this is a friendly amendment, with the caveat that we will make certain adjustments to it before the full committee. So if you'd like to make comment on that, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Chairman, I refer to the sponsor.
Representative Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I stand ready for questions.
So we're voting to put the amendment on the bill. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The amendment's on the bill. Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me quickly back up and just put this in the proper posture why we're here and what we're discussing. So completely unprecedented times the last 22 months. Our frontline healthcare workers have worked tirelessly for 22 months. Many have left the field because of the incredible hours and burden that they've had to caring for Tennesseans. Over the 22 months of this pandemic, those frontline workers worked for about a year without a vaccine. For the last year or so, there has been a vaccine. We now are facing a critical phase in this pandemic. We've moved beyond crisis in terms of our healthcare workers, and that's the words of administrators that have been spoken to me. We've moved beyond a crisis point because the healthcare field has been depleted and significantly overworked. And so we're entering a critical phase where we may not have enough people to provide quality care for Tennesseans. Emergency rooms now, I'll speak specifically for Knox County, won't reference anybody else. Some of our emergency rooms have 8 and 9 hour waits, which people have had to be treated in the waiting rooms. Just simply, it's not a matter of capacity, it's a matter of staff. And unfortunately, a CMS mandate has been issued requiring employees to get vaccinated or tested, or they're not allowed to continue to serve. I find that completely unacceptable. They have sacrificed and served so much on behalf of Tennesseans. We need them caring for us. August 5th, the CDC director said that the vaccine does nothing to stop transmission. On, make sure I get my dates right, on January 19th, just a couple of weeks ago, CDC put out a report that natural immunity is 6 times stronger than immunity from the vaccine. So my point with saying that is these healthcare workers have the ability to make their own decision, the best decision for them, if they're willing to serve or not, with or without a vaccine. Federal government should not be stepping in, forcing them to make that decision, putting our healthcare system in a position that is beyond stretch of what it is right now. And so what this language does, unfortunately, we are limited in what we can do from a state level with the CMS mandate. And so what this particular piece of legislation does, it simply says that any medical or religious exemption that is submitted by a healthcare worker to their healthcare provider must be granted. Now, there's some stipulations in here. The exemption related to health must be signed by a physician. So it's not just I'm going to submit and say I have this condition, I can't get the vaccine. Must be signed by a physician. I believe that's defined in TCA 63 and 68, I believe. And then regarding the religious exemption, there are certain Title VII parameters federally around religious exemptions. And so my office has received numerous emails from people across the state whose religious exemptions have been denied, which begs the question, is that a Title VII violation, which is a whole other conversation. But you have religious exemptions being denied. You also have medical exemptions being denied. It's completely unacceptable. And there's multiple entities that are doing that. And so we have to stand for our healthcare workers. We have to stand for our frontline workers. And then we've got to stand for Tennesseans to ensure that Tennesseans receive the quality of care that we expect. And when the CMS mandate goes into effect February 14th and March 15th, we have the healthcare workers to be able to meet the healthcare needs of our community. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will rest and answer any questions.
Thank you, Representative Zachary. Representative Clemens, you're first on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just have a couple questions. So is the bill as amended, the employer, it says that employers are required to do all this. Are hospitals, nursing homes, ambulatory surgical centers, hospices, rehab facilities, and other healthcare providers covered under that?
It would be the healthcare providers as listed in Title 63.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the Supreme Court's ruled on this in the Biden v. Missouri case. In a per curiam decision, they upheld the administrative rule as applicable to these healthcare providers. And there's already a medical and religious exemption in that rule. So why is this necessary?
Yeah, and that's actually a good
Zachary.
question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's actually a good question. I'm glad you asked. So in the CMS mandate, it says CMS requires facilities to allow for exemptions to staff with as a reasonable accommodation for a disability, sincerely held religious beliefs, observant or practice, and for medical reasons. So to your point, that's the language that's in the CMS mandate. But unfortunately, there are numerous facilities, healthcare providers across the state that are denying valid religious exemptions and denying medical exemptions. And so there's only so much we can do related to the CMS mandate. So we had legal go through. They researched ADA, Title VII. They read through the CMS mandate. They read through a Florida law that's already been passed, took all that together, looking at the CMS mandate. And we, as this state law, if this passes, will speak to areas where the CMS mandate is silent, and it intertwines and comes up to, without going above and beyond, the CMS mandate. So we're taking whatever step we can to protect frontline workers, because many are still losing their jobs, even with the CMS mandate allowing for those exemptions.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, in the per curiam decision, that was a 5-4 decision in a predominantly conservative Supreme Court. I mean, they held that one of the most basic functions of HHS is to ensure the healthcare providers who care for medical patients protect their patients' health and safety. So is the exemptions in CMS's rule, is your position that it's too vague and that it's being interpreted differently by the hospitals and healthcare systems lawyers? And I guess I'm curious as to which healthcare providers are you referring that aren't allowing these exemptions that are in the federal rule? Feel free to, if there's any by name, I don't know.
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I understood the first part of your question, the CMS mandate says these exemptions can be granted. You have numerous hospitals. I hesitate to name the hospitals, but I will name one. St. Thomas is a good example because Dr. Terry's been fairly open about St. Thomas and where he works that are denying those exemptions. Those exemptions are being denied, both religious and medical. The religious exemption piece, and talking to our legal team, may know better than me being an attorney, there are Title VII implications with denying valid religious exemptions. And so that gets into a whole nother violation of federal law, federal rule related to Title VII religious exemptions. So there are numerous facilities across the state denying these exemptions where CMS says those exemptions can be granted. And now it would be up to those facilities to ask those specific facilities why they're denying a valid medical or religious exemption when CMS says they can be granted, when those facilities when their workers are already taxed beyond what the load that they can actually carry, and then those exemptions are not being granted. So we have a responsibility to protect those frontline workers that work in Tennessee and protect Tennesseans and ensure a high quality of care. And there's only so much we can do. So this particular piece of legislation will ensure that those that are submitting valid medical and religious exemptions are granted just for COVID-19. I need to make sure that's clear. This will go under TCA 14 if passes, and it's only related to COVID-19. And I'll go back to the fact you had referenced something regarding the court, the 5-4 court, and the decision regarding protection and healthcare and safety. It's important to reiterate that on August 5th, the CDC director said the vaccine does nothing to stop transmission. Nothing to stop transmission. Many of these healthcare workers, many that have emailed me that their exemptions have been denied, have already had COVID. And so on January 19th, the CDC put out a report that said natural immunity is 6 times stronger than immunity from the vaccine. So if we're going to follow the science and listen to the experts, and I've been quoting the CDC because everybody seems to think the CDC is the be-all, end-all, but I did make a list that I thought it was important, Mr. Chairman, to cite here. So you got Dr. Harvey Risch from Yale, who's an epidemiologist, has been cited over 40,000 times. You got Dr. Scott Atlas from Stanford, who's a medical policy expert for 15 years. You got Dr. Andrew Boston from Brown University, an epidemiologist. Dr. Marty Makary for Johns Hopkins is a researcher for Johns Hopkins. Dr. Martin Kulldorff from Harvard, who's an epidemiologist, biostatistician, infectious disease outbreak doctor. And then you got Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's from Stanford, who specializes in infection diseases. They all are in complete agreement regarding the vaccine does nothing to stop transmission. They are in complete agreement, and these are Republicans and Democrats. These are not all Republicans. They also are in complete agreement, and you can look at their Twitter accounts because all I did was go through and pull information from Twitter, where they agree natural immunity is much stronger than immunity from the vaccine. So if we're going to follow the science and listen to the experts, then let's follow the science and listen to the experts. And let's take the steps we need to as Tennesseans, as the Tennessee legislature, to do what we can with working within this CMS mandate to protect all our frontline workers and ensure the highest quality care for Tennesseans moving forward.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I appreciate your position with regards to transmission and the vaccination, but the vaccination is widely recognized as being effective. And you said one of your biggest concerns was the shortage of healthcare workers. So healthcare workers who contract COVID are unable to work. So if they're unvaccinated and they're unable to work, then everyone's priority, who are the patients, healthcare workers and ours, our patients, those patients and those waiting times are going to be even longer. So there's also no dispute, like I said, there's no dispute about the effectiveness of the vaccine. It's widely recognized. And so aren't we kind of in this kind of a self-defeating prophecy to try to go further than the rule, the federal rule itself, and possibly creating more healthcare shortages in these facilities?
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, we're doing just the opposite. We're ensuring those that are submitting for religious and medical exemptions are not let go because they simply don't want to be because they simply don't want to get the vaccine.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll just limit it to 2 more questions because this is going to the full committee. Well, I'm sorry, 3 quick questions. One, wouldn't those, your claims about healthcare facilities in Tennessee currently not recognize medical or religious exemptions, wouldn't that be better suited for a federal court to address the rule that's already in place, rather than us creating a whole new law and set of problems for Tennessee employers?
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're not going to wait on the courts. I can't wait on the courts. I don't think this body can wait on the courts. We have a pending date that is less than a month away. And when that date hits, if we have not passed this, and it's important too, you reference broadly medical facilities. It is not all medical facilities. For example, we don't have any that I know of medical exemptions or religious exemptions being denied in Knox County or the surrounding areas. I've talked to most of those administrators, if not all. It's some throughout the state. So I think it's important to note this is not from Memphis to Mountain City. This is certain pockets, certain areas. But no, to wait on the courts, no, we don't wait on the courts. We're elected by Tennesseans to serve on their behalf and have their well-being in mind. And if we wait for the courts, God help us, the courts have gotten us into more of a mess with so many of these things. We need to move forward and act on behalf of Tennesseans, and that's what this bill does.
Representative Clemens.
Okay, so currently state law requires vaccinations of healthcare workers and others for flu, MMR, other things. What is the difference between these state mandates, as you call them, versus this one federal rule?
Representative Zachary.
This bill is pertaining to COVID-19 vaccine, and that's what this is focused on. The health department would have to comment on other vaccines or requirements.
Representative Clemens.
I understand your point there with regard to this is limited to COVID-19, but the state requires other vaccines for other things. I'm not seeing the difference while we're picking out this COVID-19 vaccine versus these others. What's the rationale there?
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have the federal government that has stepped in, which is unprecedented, saying that you have to have a particular vaccine to be able to continue to work in the healthcare industry. It's unprecedented. We as Tennesseans, we as the Tennessee General Assembly, I keep saying Tennesseans, we as the Tennessee General Assembly can take certain steps, not many, but we can take certain steps to protect Tennesseans, and that's what we're doing here with this particular piece of legislation.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm just surprised that we as a state legislature are seeking to address a single federal rule when we ourselves already have state laws speaking of this very thing over which we have more direct jurisdiction. If we're interested in protecting medical exemptions and religious beliefs, I guess I'm just curious why those aren't the subject of this legislation as well. And then also, just out of curiosity, and I just don't know this, what religions prohibit vaccines?
Representative Zachary.
That would be a question for a pastor or a priest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, next up is Representative Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to just clear this up, and for the sponsor, if I say something that may not align with the intent of your legislation, please let me know. The way I see it is this, is that CMS has put down language that requires hospitals to do certain things. And that language may be a bit ambiguous, right? So I think in doing this, we're letting employers know we're not tying their hands, but we're giving them discretion to rehire healthy folks that can take care of our unhealthy folks coming into the hospitals, right? Some folks may have been let go for certain reasons that maybe they shouldn't have. And I think some employers have been, may have misunderstood or didn't understand exactly what CMS's intent was. And I don't think their intent was to have folks that are healthy and able to care for our most vulnerable to be let go and not to be rehired. So I think your legislation provides a mechanism for those employers to reevaluate folks that have been let go, maybe unlawfully or unintentionally, I guess is a better way to put it, right? To be rehired and to get back into the healthcare system. I don't think we're, I know there's been talk about religion, this, that, and the other, but really this bill is about healthcare in general. It's to provide for folks that need that care to have the folks there to give that care, right? So I appreciate you bringing this piece of legislation, Chairman Zachary, and I know this it's a hot topic, vaccines and the mandates and everything else, but I think and I know that we're here for the same reason, and we want to have as many people on the front lines in our hospitals caring for people that need that care as possible. So just wanted to thank you for bringing this legislation.
Thank you, Chairman.
Representative Zachary, you got anything?
No, sir.
All right, next up is Representative Griffey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Zachary, for bringing this important legislation. I fully support it. My only comment might be that maybe it doesn't go far enough to protect Tennesseans, and only in the sense that, as written, the Attorney General will have to get involved and might have to go to Chancery Court and so forth. Senator Hensley filed a bill, I think it's Senate Bill 2025. I think I've got the companion bill I'm filing today in the House, that would simply make it a misdemeanor offense to require anybody to get the COVID vaccine as a condition of employment or provide proof and so forth. And it would start out with simply fines. And the reason I suggested that is because in this version of your bill, it will be upon the people who are harmed, Tennesseans that may have lost their job, to have to go through the Attorney General, try to get into court and all that. If we simply had a C misdemeanor or something like that, you can call the local sheriff. The sheriff can investigate whether somebody's requiring somebody to get the vaccine or not, issue them a citation. They'll show up in General Sessions Court. We'll probably get this thing resolved in about a week or 2 weeks and be done with it. This bill is important that you're doing, and I'm definitely for it. What I think is clear to everyone at this point, at least I hope it is, that American people and Tennesseans have been misled regarding these vaccines and what they're going to do. Some might use the term lied to. They don't stop transmission, as you've clearly pointed out, and we were told early in the pandemic that that's what you had to get the vaccine to stop the transmission. And the vaccines were 99% effective or 90% effective, whatever. That's complete bull at this point. They are trying to get, we don't really know what's going to happen with these vaccines because it's a new method. It's a messenger RNA approach to treating the spike protein and get the body to react to that. It's completely different, hasn't been used before. They're having to sue to get the clinical data from those trials from Moderna and Pfizer. And Pfizer and Moderna is wanting to slow walk that, and they tried to get 15 years to get all the data out or something like that. If we don't know what we're putting into our bodies, I just think that's I don't have a word to describe it. But this vaccine is different from influenza, MMRA vaccination, and so forth. Those were studied for years and years and years, and they've got a good safety track record. And so I am fully supporting this. I don't think we should jump off and do these vaccines for everybody. Great Britain is releasing all their COVID priorities, mask and quarantine and all that this week. I think a number of jurisdictions, states, and countries are now saying they're not going to vaccinate their children because there's a risk to the children, more so than the vaccine. So that's all I wanted. Sorry to get on my soapbox, but I felt like it needed to be said. Thank you, Chairman Zachary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Zachary. All right, next up is Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Chairman Zachary. you know, for the record, I think I've said this before. I've never been about forcing anyone to inject anything into their bodies or do anything to their bodies other than what it is that they want to. So I've already said that on the record. However, I do, on the record also encourage people to get the vaccine, if they, deem it necessary. My question regarding the bill is, how does the bill determine what is a legitimate religious exemption request?
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that's a good question. So when legal drafted this, they went through Title VII, and Title VII, my understanding from legal, Title VII clearly lays out the limitations from an employer and what they can ask you regarding your religious exemption. Once you state a religious exemption, once you state a religious belief against whatever it may be and grant a religious exemption, it is an extremely high bar for the employer, and our attorneys can correct me if I'm wrong, it's an extremely high bar for the employer to deny that, because then you get into a violation of Title VII. So that's why regarding this legislation, a medical exemption request, you got to be signed as, I believe it's TCA 63 and 68, by a healthcare provider physician. He's got to sign off on that. So that's clear. A religious exemption, a sincerely held religious belief, it is a high bar to deny that.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that. So does a leader in that religion have to sign off on something? I guess maybe this should be directed at legal. What is the metrics for determining? Do you mind if we go out of session for a minute? I'm just trying to
All right,
throw you an
without
alley-oop.
objection, we're out of session. And legal, you are recognized. Ms. Michelle?
Michelle Fogarty, Legal Services. I can tell you what the EEOC guidance is on that issue. So the EEOC, the CMS rule refers employers to the EEOC guidance. The EEOC guidance says that religious exemption requests must be handled on a case-by-case basis. It provides 2 areas where, under certain circumstances, employers may request additional information from the employee in order to determine whether the employee qualifies for an accommodation. That would be the nature of the belief that purportedly precludes the employee from being vaccinated, and whether that belief is sincerely held. It says that there are 2 components to the inquiries about the nature of the belief that purportedly precludes vaccination: whether the belief is specific and actually precludes vaccination, and whether the belief is religious in nature.
Representative Parkinson, you got any questions for legal?
No questions for
Okay.
legal.
Anybody
To
else
the
got any
sponsor.
questions for legal? All right, we're back in session.
Thank you. And think just so does the language in your bill reflect the language that Attorney Fogarty just spoke on?
Representative Zachary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, legal drafted it with EEOC and Title VII in mind.
Okay. One last
Representative
question.
Parkinson.
And thank you for that. And so, what are we doing different than what? And I don't have an issue with your bill, as long as my hospitals are okay with it. But what are we doing differently than in your bill than the feds are doing?
Representative
Because it's the same language.
You recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So part of the problem is the federal government. So we've had the OSHA mandate, we've had the federal contractor mandate, now we've got a CMS mandate. The issue is, and you're talking about the federal government, the issue is the CMS mandate is requiring proof of vaccination or testing in order to maintain employment. CMS, as I was discussing with your representative seated above you, CMS provides for medical and religious exemptions. So CMS, I read that, CMS lays that out clearly. You have facilities here in the state that are denying those exemptions. There's no reason to deny those exemptions. You have been, I keep hearing, and I've called some of the administrators in those facilities, well, we have to be concerned about federal funding. CMS has given you the ability to grant medical and religious exemptions, and you're denying them for no valid reason other than you're denying them, and then those people are losing their job. So we're simply saying, related to COVID-19, under TCA 14, that if a medical or valid medical exemption has to be signed for, a sincerely held religious belief exemption is submitted, that those simply be granted to preserve the jobs of our healthcare workers to ensure Tennesseans get the quality care they need moving forward.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're basically, and I get it. So we're basically saying we're not going to let the federal government say it. We're going to say it ourselves. Same language that we're saying that the federal government is saying. But what I do get about the bill is that it will serve as, I think, more of an educational tool for, these healthcare providers, healthcare institutions, to be able to look at, here's the rules for how you approve or deny a religious exemption, because it's the same language. And I don't have an issue with your bill, same language, but it sounds like more of, we're not going to let the feds dictate to us. So we're going to write the same thing the feds wrote down in a bill and say, we're saying it now. And I'm okay with that. If, I'm not trying to ridicule your bill. Seriously, I'm okay with that, as long as my hospitals are okay with it. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Zachary.
I think you could say, and I'm never going to say, Representative Parkins, I agree with you. I'm just simply not going to say that. But what I am going to say is we are certainly reinforcing federal rule and federal law with this. That's what I'll say.
Representative Ramsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and so I'll be addressing the bill as amended with this amendment. I'm not going to get into the philosophy that generated the bill. The statistics and science has become a political ping pong ball game, and the Spanish flu happened in 1918. In the past 20 years, we've been developing statistics from that event. So there's going to be changes in the future from the statistics that show up here. But what the amendment really does is it's based on the reality that was mentioned here, that the Supreme Court has ruled that the requirements are valid and enforceable from the federal government. And we have a program with the Department of Health where we have 90 inspectors that go out and verify for the CMS the compliance of these institutions that were mentioned in a list. So what our concern is that failure to comply with the federal regulation could result in loss of funding, federal funding, and that alone is $9.4 billion for just hospitals alone. So that's what generated the interest in amending this bill, and so we're appreciative that the sponsor is allowing this amendment to be part of the bill. And that's if any further questions about the amendment, I'd be glad to answer. Thank you.
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Chairman Russell. Chairman Ramsey, thank you for those comments. So yes, this amendment and the final amendment you'll see, which will have a few tweaks there, not substantive changes that you'll see in full, assuming this passes, is a collaboration between the THA, between the Governor's Office, Department of Health, and so there has been significant collaboration with this piece of legislation, and then we just had a conversation with legal regarding funding and regarding litigation of this, and so the posture will provide for a better path forward, to your point, Chairman, so thank you for making those points.
Representative Ramsey, you got anything to follow up with?
No, I'm fine.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Ogles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the sponsor. I commend you in bringing this bill. I'm glad to see that we're taking a stance, standing up for, in many ways, I believe it's kind of the little guy out there. It seems the vast majority of people are choosing to get vaccinated, but there is a minority group out there, I would say, that for religious beliefs, rights of conscience, or medical reasons is pushing back. And it's nice to see that Republicans are actually pushing back against big business to some degree and standing up for the little guy. This is a right-to-work state, but right to work does not mean it's right to discriminate. And these people have civil rights, and they have rights and employees, and I'm glad to see we're standing up for those rights. I do kind of share Representative Griffey's concern and that this bill is limited in scope to kind of the CMS mandate. I commend what you're doing. It's not a criticism of you in any way, but the General Assembly had a chance to lead in this and preempt that Supreme Court decision. And I hate to say hindsight's 20/20, but if we had been a little bit more aggressive in the past, I believe that the legislation passed by the General Assembly of Tennessee would have been written into that law, that Supreme Court ruling. It would have made up a large bulk of that decision, and we had that opportunity. And I wish we had been a little more aggressive on the front end, but that's in no way reflected towards your piece of legislation. And I commend you and members of leadership and members of this body in taking a stance and standing up for employees in the state of Tennessee. Thank you, sponsor.
Thank you.
Representative Zachary.
Thank you.
All right, next up is Representative Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome. Congratulations on your new role. I look forward to working with you, Representative Russell. It's awesome. Chairman Zachary, thank you very much for bringing this this legislation. A couple of things that I wanted to point it out and get your take on. I think that we have hospitals that are defining their own rules when they decide to grant a medical exemption or a religious exemption. The Supreme Court's decision doesn't give them guidance on what they should or should not consider when granting that medical or religious exemption. My problem is that you can have two different folks, two different nurses working for two different hospitals, have the exact same medical condition, apply for that medical exemption based upon that medical condition. One hospital will grant it and the other one will not. And there's no reasons provided. So I'm curious for the intent or the reasons why you're bringing this legislation is to help provide guidance on what constitutes the medical exemption or what constitutes a religious exemption, so we don't have different hospitals doing different things to different folks when their reasons for needing the exemption are the exact same. Would that be proper?
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Representative Garrett, you're exactly right. This provides consistency from Memphis to Mountain City, preserves as many healthcare workers' jobs as possible. And again, I think I don't want to continue to reiterate the same point, but it's ensuring Tennesseans receive quality care that they expect and have received, most of them throughout their entire lives, moving forward. I mean, no matter where you are economically, no matter what part of the state you're in, there's expectation that if I have an emergency, I can go and be seen. I'll receive a proper quality of care. And since I dropped this bill, the emails that I have gotten, there was one lady that emailed me. She sat in an emergency room for over 9 hours, became dehydrated, passed out in the emergency room, and had to be treated. They could not take her back for another 2 hours. She spent 11 hours in a waiting room. And when they finally took her back, they said they're so short-staffed, they simply don't have the staff to meet the demand. And this was not in a rural area. So for us to be able to provide guidance, take away any guesswork related to this COVID-19 vaccine, very similar to what we did with the COVID protection bill, that piece of legislation has preserved thousands and thousands of jobs, As a sponsor of that bill, since that bill passed, I have been involved with some of the largest companies in the country who have reached out regarding this bill. This is the same goal and impact, to preserve as many jobs as possible. And I'll say this with trying to be very careful how I say it. The federal government of the United States, for the last 22 months, I didn't say the last year, for the last 22 months has failed the American people. We as the Tennessee General Assembly have to do all we can to protect the people of our state. The federal government has failed us for the last 22 months. I did not say the last 12, the last 22 months. It's egregious what has been done in this country, egregious. We as Tennesseans have to do everything we can to protect the people of this state against a federal government who Governor Haslam used to say has become an unreliable partner. I heard Governor Haslam, the 2 terms I served under him, he said that numerous times. I'll take it a step further and say the federal government has become an adversarial partner to states. and it's got to stop. It's got to stop. I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman. I'll get off my soapbox. Stop there.
Representative Garrett, you recognize.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. I agree wholeheartedly, from any instances of there were other smallpox, flu, MNR. I don't know in any case of those circumstances that the federal government ever mandated a vaccine. So we are truly in unprecedented waters, especially when, and I know you've heard from it, I know most of the people on this committee and all those that can hear my voice that can talk to a nurse or talk to a nurse tech and realize the decision they have to make when they know their patient is going to be sacrificed because they have a belief that they don't believe the vaccine is for them, and they have no other choice but to either take the vaccine or quit their job because they're being threatened by their employer. And that's just, I agree, an unacceptable situation to put anyone in. Final two questions, Mr. Chairman, is that with Representative Ramsey's amendment, I wanted to make sure that whatever the language is going to come out of that amendment, you, along with Representative Ramsey, are going to work that it's not going to conflict with the current CMS guidelines as they are currently out there, either from the Supreme Court decision or that already exists under federal law. Is that correct?
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is correct. We have been working with Chairman Russell, Chairman Farmer, Speaker's Office, Legal, THA, Governor's Office, Department of Health, to ensure that, again, we are, I'll say, complementing the CMS mandate. I hate to say that, but we're complementing and speaking to the areas that it's silent and doing what we can as a state to ensure that we're not overlapping, going beyond whatever you think about a mandate and the federal mandate. We're ensuring that we're in compliance with that, and what we're doing, again, complements that. So there is no, I guess, Chairman Ramsey referenced the $9 billion. That's a non-issue, and legal assures us that the way this has been drafted, taking Chairman Ramsey's amendment, which again goes a step further to provide some language regarding retroactivity and some other things to ensure compliance, that we feel like that guarantees us where we where we need to be regarding the CMS mandate.
Representative Garrett.
One more, and I'll let you off the hook. I know that the amendment is going to be worked on between now and when it gets to the full, but I'm curious if there's any. Well, let's just say the amendment's on, it becomes law. We still have hospitals that deny an employer their medical or religious exemption. What's the penalty for that particular employer?
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Griffey kind of referenced that. So we looked at a couple of different options and consulting with legal. We moved toward a fine. It'll be the grievance is simply taking the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General then moves to investigate, and there's a $10,000 fine per occurrence.
Representative Garrett, you have any more?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
And Representative Clemens.
Thanks. I just had to follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To your answers to Representative Garrett's question, two questions. So right now, because of this per curiam decision, it has been kicked back to the 8th and 5th Circuit.
Say again. I'm sorry. Say what? Just say that
Because
first
of
part.
the per curiam decision of the Supreme Court in Biden versus Missouri, it's been kicked back to the 8th and 5th Circuit Courts of Appeals on the question of whether or not the HHS rule can be upheld. So it's an administrative rule being appealed at the federal courts, right?
Representative Zachary.
I mean, you don't disagree with that?
Yeah. Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you said that we're essentially passing a law that is in agreement with, and I think you're trying to provide clarity to the administrative rule of HHS. Is that correct?
Representative Zachary.
So I will say that we are complementing and speaking to the areas that are silent within the CMS mandate.
But in line with that mandate or rule, correct?
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We feel like the language that we drafted does not put us in violation of that.
Representative Clemens.
Okay, so you're essentially seeking to codify HHS's administrative rule in state law. So if the 8th Circuit and 5th Circuit rule against HHS, Tennessee is now going to have that rule codified with your legislation, and it won't be applied by the federal government, it'll be applied by the state government. Do you realize that?
Representative Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, we could sit here and talk about how different courts are going to rule, but this particular piece of legislation is directly targeted at the CMS mandate in protecting Tennessee healthcare workers and ensuring Tennesseans' care moving forward.
Representative Clemens.
I appreciate your point and aim, and we all respect sincerely held religious beliefs and understand the point of this legislation. But there is a scenario that could play out in the federal court system where Tennessee is the only state that's required to follow this and have these mandates because of this bill, because it could be overturned at the federal level. I think it's important for us to recognize that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Zachary. All right, now we're back on the bill as amended. Do I have any other questions? All right, the question's been called. Those in favor of House Bill 1867 to move to full signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Goes to civil full.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
All right, next up is item number 3, House Bill 1472 by Representative Ogles. You got a motion and a second. Is
Thank you,
Representative
Chairman.
Ogles?
Members of the committee. Chairman, I believe there's an amendment traveling on the bill,
They are, and what's that amendment number?
005635.
That's what I've got. Do we got a motion, and do we have a second?
Second on the amendment.
We got a motion and a second on amendment 05635. Representative Ogles, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Members, this amendment expands criminal asset forfeiture. And I say that again, it's criminal asset forfeiture. It does not include civil asset forfeiture, which some of you are very concerned, but this expands criminal asset forfeiture to aggravated rape, rape of a child, aggravated rape of a child, rape, and as well as involuntary labor servitude. And members, the reason I've drafted this legislation is there's crimes in which we have found generally acceptable to seize assets, mainly in the drug trade, but this piece of legislation would expand that to sex trafficking, as well as there's also going to be an amendment on the bill that I'll include in full committee from Representative Hardaway that will include acts of terrorism in these communities. Members, this piece of legislation will target the worst of the worst in our communities and target their assets as well. With that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Representative Ogles. And first on the list is Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we, or would you consider adding egregious criminal littering to that for dumping?
Representative Ogles.
Thank you, Representative. I usually am very aggressive in my legislation, but I don't know that I would include littering as a mechanism for seizing assets. This is specifically targeting the vehicles for those who commit sexual acts, the houses in which they commit atrocities towards people. I don't know that littering, as much as I hate scooters, which sometimes I think is litter, but I don't think I would expand that to seize assets.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. And not to belabor the point, when I said littering, I'm thinking about egregious dumping acts that have a big effect on people's properties and you know in their communities and in our county. So just something to think about. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but when you listed your list of acts, you know, a lot of times, you know, there's no recourse for people that are really causing a drain and a strain on our communities, our property values, you know, dumping tires, building materials into some of our green areas and spaces like that. And so I just felt like we should be able to go after their assets, you know, when they are found to have been, you know, committing these crimes, and maybe we can tie that into this bill. So I want you to really, really think about that seriously.
Representative Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for bringing that point up. I have found it interesting that as a member of the community and a business person, many times, for instance, in the commercial banking department, if you would, for instance, if you'd like to take out a loan, sometimes you may have to secure assets to do that. So for people to take out loans to start companies, we give up some of our most prized possessions, but yet we've insulated those homes, those vehicles, those assets from some of the worst criminals in our community. And I just find that baffling. I'd like to see this expanded for criminal, but please don't let this get confused with civil asset forfeiture. We're talking about two different things. But thank you, Representative, for that.
Representative Parkinson, do you have any further? All right, not seeing any other questions, we are voting to amend House Bill 1472 by adding Amendment 05635. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes have it, and the amendment goes on the bill. Representative Ogles, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. With that, I'll rest.
Question's been called. Those in favor of House Bill 1472 going to civil justice full signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes have it. Civil justice full.
Thank you, committee.
All right, without objection, House Bill 1542 has been rolled 1 week, and that is item number 4 on the calendar today. And that looks like a wrap. Let's see here. Seeing no more bills on the calendar, do any members have any personal orders or comments? And Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to commend you on a great first day in here, and you did a great job. I sincerely appreciate it. And I have a young man visiting me today, Mr. Aiden Pratt. Aiden, if you'll stand up. Aiden is visiting and shadowing me today, and he's from Watertown, I believe, right? Lebanon, Tennessee, my hometown. So if y'all would welcome him today.
Good to have you here, Aiden. Anybody else? All right, those in favor of, actually, we don't have to do that. We are adjourned.